Hello, Internet! Gino, that Pinguino Greco here again with another episode of Deep Listens. And today we will finally be talking about Papers, Please. Our recording process of Papers, Please was the Papers, Please of recording processes. This is not the first time we've recorded this podcast, but hopefully it will be the best time we've recorded this podcast. And I am joined, as always, by Billy Dark Souls Rothert.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. You could call me that after the past weekend of Giant Bomb Community Endurance Run madness, but if all things go according to plan, I'll be taking a nice, well-deserved break from Dark Souls for a while.
Feel like I should have called you either Sunny D or Finish Your Plate, because I know you've got another jug of Sunny D that you need to finish.
About 30 more ounces. And
Finish your plate.
I've been taking little sips here and there. Actually, the first time we recorded the Papers, Please podcast, before that one got destroyed by audio problems, I was actually taking sips of it while we were talking in between conversation points.
I see. Well, that's good to know. We are also joined, as always, by Pete Sack Around Busby.
Yeah, if there's one thing in this world I like to do, it is sacking around.
Guys are a bunch of dicks.
That's our new catchphrase for the podcast, Deep Listens, the only podcast where our primary goal is to sack around. What's going on, everybody? Glad to be back. Fun fact for this week. So, in the human body, there are 10 times as many bacteria cells as human cells. And those bacteria contribute pretty substantially to your functioning. So when people ask, sort of what is the human, you got to take into account, well, the human isn't all human. Ooh, spooky.
And you know what's spooky? Is that all the times we messed up this recording, Pete's just had, new facts ready to go every time.
I'm just always worried I've forgotten. I'm going to start repeating them.
Don't worry.
How many
super dedicated listeners are going to have to dial in?
The fan base is going to let you know. Next week, comment section, Pete, you had a repeat.
You repeated.
How many different facts do you have queued up at any given time?
Not that many. This one I had to pull from deep out. Have I done the tree network one yet?
You've done the network
but that's
of
some
plant
foreshadowing.
Communication. Oh no, you have. You've done the network of plant communication because I've shared that. It's like this fungus system that lets trees talk across the forest.
It's not my only plant fact. I have many, many more.
Oh, I know you do.
I thought you said that in passing, not on the show.
No, I remember that was a good one.
I thought that just came up in a discussion because you were having your humans are the only thing that can think perspective, and then I think you just said, but what about these trees that can talk?
That's not my perspective. And I actually just got a new nail in the coffin to support my claims recently. It's a pretty new branch of philosophy, but we're not going to talk about that now. We're going to talk about what is it? How do you refer to it as the authoritarian state?
Yes.
Yeah.
We will be, but before that, we've got feedback.
Ooh.
So first, we've got feedback about animal facts, which is the best kind of feedback. How do people
give feedback?
They do so by sending a tweet at DeepListensPod or going to deeplistens.libsyn.com and hitting up our comments sections, or going to deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com and then sending an email. And you could sound something like this. Like this. This comes from Sean, who is emailing back. He had an email last week about tarsiers, and he says, "Hey folks, thanks for including my feedback in the latest episode. I just wanted to add that the connection to Little Nightmares, aside from itself being a little nightmare, is that the game was developed by Tarsier Studios." So it turns out that the game was developed by a company named after the horrifying Bush Baby.
I mean, good animal to pick. Sure.
Interesting.
So do you think that if bush babies are like that because they're like tiny babies in bushes, that's like a bush devil?
Maybe?
Bush demon?
They remind me kind of the basilisks from Dark Souls, because the basilisk from Dark Souls also kind of a nightmare monster, and it's just got 2 huge eyes and tiny mouth.
That's horrifying.
It also inflicts petrify, aka curse, which cuts your health permanently in half.
Yeah,
well, that's great.
That's what basilisks do. They turn things to stone.
Mm-hmm.
We have another bit of feedback. This comes from John Atwood on YouTube. We do check our YouTube comments because right now they are manageable, but in the not too distant future, they won't be because
When we
we'll
get
just have
huge
so many
and
people commenting,
explode.
When we become influencers.
or it'll just be full of garbage like the rest of YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
But until then, here's a comment from YouTube. John Atwood says, "Hey Gino, Billy, Pete. Billy has said that he has stopped playing a few games because of some dicey subjects or some jokes in bad taste or something along those lines. Charles Barkley, Shut Up and Jam, Saints Row the Third. Why do you think these moments affect you so strongly? Does this have to do with the immersiveness of the game or personal dedication to insert yourself into the story to find some greater value than a surface-level analysis would give? Where does this aversion come from? And or could you guys talk about the meta-ethics of video games, specifically ones you found affected you strongly? Maybe you have learned some moral lesson from a video game, or have some experience in which you questioned your own moral belief system. Thanks, dudes."
So sure, I can start here. There's a couple good examples that the comment mentioned, which was Charles Barkley, Shut Up and Jam, and Saints Row the Third. I think there were some other games that I didn't finish, but those are mainly the two games that I said I'm going to stop playing at this point because something happened. So for Barkley, Shut Up and Jam, Gaiden, the thing that made me not want to play the game anymore was that it made light of medical issues that are currently ailing very close, near and dear to my heart members of my family, and that was in poor taste. And in Saints Row the Third, I sort of walked myself into this one where I created a protagonist, because you can design your own character. I created a protagonist after a real-life person that I think very highly of, and it was a female person that I built the character after, and when they were sort of against their will put into a sex trafficking situation, that was really not cool with me. As for one, the person who I created my character after was someone that I thought very highly of and didn't want to see bad things happen to, which is admittedly kind of my fault for putting them into a Saints Row game. I should have known better, so that was kind of on me. But that paired with knowing a person who's been a victim of sexual violence, I'm really just not cool with certain jokes made about that stuff. But the common denominator with both of those two games is that it, one, really did something off-putting to me and said, I'm not okay with this joke made in poor taste, or I'm not okay with them taking light this particular subject matter, and also I didn't find the game particularly fun. Both of those things kind of have to happen at the same time. So it's not just that a game says or does something in poor taste. That's not enough to make me quit. It's got to both... I mean, I shouldn't say that, actually. A game could be in such poor taste that no matter how fun it is, I'll quit, but it's not the only reason. Those games were both in poor taste, and also I didn't enjoy them that much. Saints Row the Third was kind of closer to being fun enough that I could keep going, but the bigger picture here is, one, it was in poor taste, and two, I actually kind of want to save this next point for after you guys respond, because this is going to be a slightly deeper topic. But that's my superficial reasons for stopping playing Saints Row the Third and Barkley, Shut Up and Jam Gaiden. So why don't you guys go?
Yeah, and I don't think that those are superficial at all. I think those are legitimate criticisms of both of those games. So Pete, what do you think? Any time that a game has made you quit due to offending your sensibilities, or and then I think we'll take on the meta ethics and things we've learned second.
Yeah. No, I can't really say that any game I've started playing has made me quit it. I think there's obviously sort of a selection bias here, right? Like a game that probably would have made me quit, I would never start playing in the first place. But most of the time, if I come up with games like this, this might just be due to my training, most likely. But I tend to see them as sort of a exercise in rhetoric, right? Like if something's reprehensible, I sort of ask, all right, what's its operation here? What is it doing? Right? How is it sort of tapping into a certain ideology, and what is that underlying ideology? But like I said, the thing that allows me to perform procedures like that is the fact that these games I'm playing are most likely pre-selected such that I'm not going to be, because obviously I have my subjects as well. So if any game really touched into those, I probably wouldn't be able to perform this procedure as objectively, obviously.
Yeah, or I guess as dispassionately, because I feel like objective in this case, I don't know that it is any less objective for someone to play a game that they have some personal experience with a topic that's being broached in the game and then reacting to it strongly. I don't think that is any less valid of
a fair point. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I definitely vacillate between trying to operate in that mode as well, and then just trying to come to terms with if I have an emotional response to a game, like actually letting that emotion out and thinking about it. Like I've at first when I played Doki Doki Literature Club, I early on was making it almost like what is this game about? Almost a fact-finding mission. And a little bit of a like archaeological thing, like what's this game doing? Why do people like it so much? What's going on with these characters? Like there's a lot of literary reading in playing that game, and then once it took a turn, I put it down and didn't want to play it again. I really didn't like a turn in that game, and I felt it was crass and exploitative. And then the next day I woke up and said, well, clearly there's got to be more to this game than this, because the people who recommended it to me would not have recommended it to me if this twist was all there is to it. Mm-hmm. And so I went back to it, played it more, finished it, and was thankful that I did, because I ended up enjoying most of the experience. But that game definitely got close. So I think the common denominator is just like when a game gets close to something that personally triggers you, like just sometimes it's not enjoyable, or it's not worth the emotional expenditure to deal with the annoyance or being upset in that way. Sometimes you're down to clown and ready to put up with that sort of thing, and sometimes it's just not a situation that you want to put yourself into. So on the meta ethics, like stuff that we've learned from games, have you guys taken away any sort of larger life lesson or larger lesson about, philosophy or anything like that from a game, or morality?
I can go first here because I have a really long history with sort of like long narrative adventure games, similar to Gino's long history with specifically Final Fantasy games. That's not like a jab at Gino, but like you're really entrenched in the RPG realm. I find myself really entrenched in the genre of like long narrative action adventure games. Stuff that comes to mind is like the Legend of Zelda series, or things like Shadow of the Colossus, which is a shorter game but still has a sort of an epic narrative scope. And even to a lesser extent, stuff like Mass Effect or Dragon Age games. I find myself deeply entrenched in that kind of gameplay all the time, and specifically the common denominator there is that there has to be some sort of like cipher character so that I can project my own moralities and beliefs onto them in some way. And sometimes the game has a mechanic of choice, like the Mass Effect games do, and sometimes they don't. It's just the narrative, but I'm drawn towards the games that have narratives that would align with my own morality systems. I get a lot of benefit from games that allow me to actualize myself through the character's actions, what I would do in those scenarios. So I wouldn't say that I've necessarily taken something away from a game, like a morality shift or like a morality lesson, but I have had my own moral tenets like solidified or actualized in such a way that I'm more secure and confident in them, because I was able to like live them out through some sort of narrative that the game was presented that like the game presented to me. So that's one of my takeaways as far as like meta ethics. I've been able to actualize myself a little more than I would in a day-to-day situation where I may not have circumstances like space opera, who lives, who dies kind of thing.
Sure. Pete, you ever take anything away?
I mean, no, I don't think I sort of do it in the same way. Like most of my sort of high-level theory comes from, reading, just because that's what I've spent, however many years doing. What I prefer to use games for, and this is what I use, fiction, for as well. It's more of, case studies or thought experiments, right? Like you can take theory and apply it, that's basically what we do on the podcast. You take these sort of high level theories and apply them to the specific instances in the game itself. So while I don't sort of take, moral, ethical, theoretical lessons from the games, what they are useful for is clarifying those sorts of lessons I get elsewhere. Because I mean, the more sort of case studies you have, the more effective they'll be. And I can't just go around all day applying, Marxist ideology to my daily life, or I'd get fired pretty quickly.
I demand time off. In fact, I shouldn't have to ask for time off. It should be given.
I'm gonna walk into my
boss's
boss's office tomorrow and just take his computer. Be like, I'm taking back the means of production now.
And I'm going to give the hard drive to this employee. I'm going to give the keyboard to this employee. Yeah, so for me, I mean, there's the obvious Final Fantasy IX. It changed a lot of my scopes on a lot of the ways I view mortality and belonging in a place and the sense of one's home. Like a lot of my perspectives on belonging in places and living life to the fullest, like a lot of those things came from that game. And then an example also, Final Fantasy VIII was a big one as like a way to kind of grow up, because I feel like in that game they do a lot of, like, the main character is really fucking petulant, and for a lot of the game I really, really resonated with the main character's petulance and like some of his perspectives on not caring about other people, and other people just kind of hold you back. And for a while, like as a young kind of misanthropic youth, that all made a lot of sense to me, and it seemed like, oh, see, this game gets it. And then as I played it again, like slightly older, I realized that he was fucking petulant and insufferable, and that helped me realize how much I had grown. Just going from like, oh, he's awesome, a badass, and I want to be like him, to being like, oh, Squall's just terrible. It turns out he doesn't deserve any of this. It's actually bad storytelling that anyone would put up with his bullshit. Wow.
It's kind of like the worst side of like teenage angst, where you think, oh, it's cool to think that like the world's out to get you and like everyone's an asshole, and so I'm gonna be callous. And you're like, no, that's not how things work.
No. I mean, you can do that, but like no one's gonna put up with you. Like That's not how. Being a fucking bummer is not. It's not a great way to live life.
People that are like that don't get 40-hour narratives made around them.
No, they don't get put in charge of things.
And they certainly don't get a junction system.
Yep, that's true. To give everyone sweet amnesia and powers.
So
okay.
There was one topic that I wanted to hit sort of right on the end.
Okay,
so
sure.
I wanted to just dive a little bit deeper into the games that I stopped playing, and I didn't have this idea like properly formed the first time, but I think I've got it now. So some of my friends will make fun of me about this, I guess, this standard that I've set for myself, or this idea that I perpetuate about myself, that I have a pretty high standard for humor, what makes me like actually laugh organically. I'm talking not like a chuckle, but like actually like belly laughing and like throwing head back and everything for real laughter. I can't get that from like lowbrow comedy. I can't get that from cheap, like gasp-seeking thrills in a game or in any kind of media. And I think Pete actually over the weekend had a quote, and I think it was from Sunny, Always Sunny?
It's Always Sunny.
Yeah.
And it was like laughs are cheap. I'm going for gasps.
Yep. Max says that in Nightman Cometh.
Something
Dayman
like
Cometh?
that. Dayman Cometh? Yeah, something like
One
that.
of those. Yeah,
That's
the
great.
title.
The fans would know what we're talking about. So whenever a piece of media, whether it's comedy, movie, music, game, whatever, if they try to get a reaction out of me just by doing something like offensive and outlandish, I typically don't respond the way they want me to. And in the cases that I mentioned in Barkley, Shut Up and Jam Gaiden, and Saints Row the Third, I think both of those games are aiming to like parade in front of me scenes of like obscenity or scenes of like ridiculous, like I guess offensive material or like outlandish behavior, just to get a response out of me, and that doesn't do it for me. So in the same way that if I were at a comedy club, for example, listening to some stand-up comedy, and the person made a bunch of jokes about sexual violence, I'd probably get up and leave the comedy show and ask for my money back. So, in the same sense, like I didn't pay for either of these two games. Well, first you can't pay for Barkley, Shut Up and Jam Gaiden.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, and I was able to get Saints Row from a friend, so I didn't pay for these games. But if this were a similar situation, I'd probably get up and leave and ask for my money back, saying, "Hey, I'm not into this. I would like to opt out." And this leads me to like a bigger discussion, which is one that we don't have to get into now, but one that I want to at least point to. Like if I don't find any satisfaction from games like Barkley Gaiden or Saints Row, so I don't want to put my dollars vote towards them. Like I'm not saying that they're evil that they were made. It's fine. They're aiming towards one audience. That's okay. But they're not for me. So I would want to put my vote for what kind of games get made to somewhere else. Like I would send my dollar, my sort of capitalist vote, towards a game that better reached me as an audience than these games. So in the same way that you should get up and leave the comedy show that offends you and not sit through it, I would opt out of Saints Row and Barkley Gaiden and say, I'm going to opt out. This is not for me. I shouldn't be supporting this game with my dollar in a new kind of another way.
I'd like to challenge you. I think that the game being available in Al Bhed did something for you in Barkley Shut Up and Jam.
Okay, that did something for me, but see, here's the thing.
Dude, that's all I needed to hear. Just
yeah, okay.
That part did something for me.
Before I play any game, before I hit new game on every single video game, I scroll past that option and go to options or settings.
And then you say, can I play an Al Bhed? If yes, great game. If no,
I get one. I get, oh fuck, what's that word? I got one monad of utility.
Nice.
Yeah, Pete's like, God, Billy brought fucking monads to this podcast. I got one monad of enjoyment from Barkley Gaiden.
Is that like a enjoyment unit?
No.
Yeah, it's like an atom.
Well,
okay.
A util is an enjoyment unit. A monad is a philosophical concept of a small, indivisible component.
Yeah.
Before they knew like what subatomic particles were, they thought monads were things.
Sure.
Great. So there's that feedback, and we had one other bit of feedback just asking whether, Billy, you've kept up with any of the games that were in the Game of the Year discussion that you were not able to play before the Game of the Year discussion, like Detention and Doki Doki Literature Club and Hellblade.
Yeah, real quick. So I've got Doki Doki installed on my computer now. I've turned it on. I got a few minutes into it. But that happened right, like, after Game of the Year, the beginning part of 2018. Had a weird work-life balance like issue, and I really couldn't play games for enjoyment for a while, so that kind of had to wait. And then I got into Giant Bomb Community Endurance Run Boot Camp for Dark Souls, so I spent every waking moment practicing Dark Souls boss fights. But now that Giant Bomb Community Endurance Run is over, I will get onto these games, and I do have Doki Doki Literature Club installed right now. I plan to play Detention next. I'm thinking about skipping Hellblade, not because I don't think it's good, but because I've sort of seen what the game's about, And I know that a lot of what makes the game talked about is how it handles topics of like mental health. Specifically, the character has a type of psychosis, and that from what I've heard and read about the game is that it is able to pretty accurately depict what psychosis may be like for a person, and that's pretty hard to describe in other ways. I don't have as much like personal connection to that, so it doesn't do as much for me because I do not suffer from that condition, and I don't have any person that's like close to me that I can enhance how I understand that person by playing Hellblade. So it's not like it's a bad game, but it's definitely third on the list of those three that you mentioned.
Sure. So, with that, let us move on to discussing Papers, Please. Billy, what's a Papers, Please?
All right, so full disclaimer, like I am probably the most like politically illiterate person that you people know. So a lot of what
Yes.
this game is talking about just goes straight over my head. But I'll do the best I can to describe what Papers, Please is all about.
Please.
So, in Papers, Please, your nameless protagonist is assigned the job to work as an immigration, like border checkpoint officer, and they get this job through like an employment lottery. So at some point they say, hey, your numbers come up. You've been assigned to this job. You and your family are going to be moved, and you're going to live in this house that we've provided for you, and this is going to be your job every day. And your job is to work at this border crossing checkpoint. And the country where the protagonist lives is called Arstotzka, and he's working at one of the borders for people trying to enter the country of Arstotzka. At the very beginning of the game, you get very simple instructions. Check people's passports, make sure their papers are legit. If they're good, they come into the country. If not, you turn them away. Pretty simple at first. And the first couple days that you're working at the border checkpoint, it's just like, hey, do they have a passport to come into the country? Yes or no? Is it expired? Yes or no? If everything's good, they're in. Like, very simple instructions. As the game goes on, it gets more and more complex. We'll talk about that later. But from what we understand at the very beginning of the game, there's like tensions between these fictional countries. This is where I'm kind of lost because I don't know anything about what this is trying to emulate from real history. But it seemed like kind of like a east and west boundary, but not like a East Coast, West Coast America gang war, more like a East Germany, West Germany kind of thing, if that reference is even close.
Yep. It is it's similar to that. It seems like it's supposed to be Eastern Europe. Your country is a Soviet Union stand-in. It's a communist nation, and many of the bordering countries seem like if they aren't just like countries underneath Soviet influence, they seem like other. You don't really learn that much about the other countries. You just know that it's bad.
They're boogeymen, really.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, would make sense, right? If we're thinking about, all right, this is an individual operating within some sort of communist dictatorship, there's probably very little information flowing across borders, right? In the same way that, like, one of the main ways people try to disrupt control in North Korea is by importing flash drives with sort of Western media in them to show, like, here's how people actually live outside of this dictatorship.
Yeah, and the game never really broaches that. All you ever get is state news that basically tells you stuff's bad outside of our country.
So what we know is that you live in Arstotzka. There's other countries, but there's one country in particular. The country is called Kolechia, and that is the country that has been recently at war with Arstotzka, but there's like a temporary ceasefire or something.
Yeah.
Or like a recently ended war, and primarily are trying to stop what are ostensibly Kolechian terrorists from getting into your country.
Yeah, and intermittently you will have Kolechian terrorist attacks, basically, that you can prevent if you turn people away, but sometimes you cannot. They will find their way through. They will have legitimate
Sometimes
papers.
they're scripted.
Yeah, they'll have legitimate papers. To turn them away would be a mistake, but you'll be docked.
You'll
but
be penalized at work.
Yeah, so your character's kind of in an interesting position because you get assigned this job and you get assigned this apartment, but you still pay rent, and you still have to pay for your food and heat. So basically, the better you do at work and the more people you process during the day, the more money you get to pay your rent and keep your family healthy. So I don't know about you, but early on, I think it was just like the first day, I used up my family's entire savings to pay rent and food and heat. Like whatever little buffer I had was gone within the first day. And you can go a few days without food or heat, but if you do so, your family will get sick and they will eventually die. And if all of your family dies, it's game over. And if you run out of money and can't pay rent, it's game over. So this game really puts you under the thumb and deeply incentivizes you to process as many people as you can or find some way to cheat the system. Mm-hmm. So what do you think the game's trying to do with that, Pete, with that mechanic?
So I think there's a sort of a few ways we can sort of frame this. I think the first one is sort of looking at, so there's a book by I guess I just call her a scholar, Hannah Arendt, called The Banality of Evil. And it's a very controversial book for a whole bunch of reasons. So I don't want to get sort of too into the weeds about some of the things it's saying. But I think one part of it that's particularly relevant here is she comes up with this idea, right? Oh, what did I say the book was called?
The Banality of Evil.
No, excuse me. The book's called Eichmann in Jerusalem. The issue she comes up, or the idea she comes up with, is the banality of evil. Excuse me. So it's the idea that sort of, evil isn't this thing that's just inherent in a person, right? A person isn't just born evil, let's say. Mm-hmm. Rather, it's the system around them that perpetuates this sort of evil behavior, right? So really, given a particular situation, a particular sort of bureaucracy, anybody can become evil, right? It's an exaggeration, but anyone could become Eichmann, right? If we want to put sort of an exclamation point on the whole thing. And I think you can start to see some of that operating here, right? Like you're thrust in this position where the very bureaucracy of the system, whether it's, these Byzantine rules that are handed down to you, the sort of depersonalization that comes with having all these people walk through the line, or the system where, your ability to feed your family is really predicated on detaining people, it becomes a banality of evil situation, right? It's not so much that this person's bad, you're this person, so you can make them as good or bad as you wanted. It's that this system forces certain behaviors onto the ticket checker, really.
Yeah, and this game, there's very little in the way of moral choice. You can make different actions, but the game very rarely puts a value, like you do not get rewarded.
Okay, yeah, I was going to be like, no moral choice? Like, there's definitely...
there is moral...
Right.
Like,
there's no choice. There's no moral efficacy, though, is the thing, really.
There's no more... But I guess the point I'm trying to get at more than just, like, the no moral efficacy is that for many games, they will put some sort of morality system in, quote-unquote. Like, in Bioshock or in... Mass Effect, every Bioshock, every BioWare game, there's usually a system where you can either do good thing or do bad thing. The world will change to your actions. You are informed about what the consequences of the actions will be, and you're generally, like, half of the game is figuring out what your morality will be in these given situations. Whereas in Papers, Please, you can make individual actions that make you feel like you're doing the right thing, or you're rebelling slightly, or you can do things that are more expedient that might be viewed through a moral lens as being corrupt or being evil, just objectively evil. But the game does not necessarily reward you for your actions that you feel are good, and it doesn't necessarily punish you for the actions that you think are evil, and it doesn't necessarily reward you for one way or the other. It's very much just brutal regardless of how you're acting within the system.
Mm-hmm.
And your actions can very often, whether you believe you are doing good or doing evil, your actions cause unexpected side effects. Like, for example, there was one moment that jumped out to me where there was a woman who was coming through who was being trafficked. She was apparently her and her sister were kidnapped, and this man was trying to basically take her to a strip club to work as a slave, basically. And she tells you, hey, he's two people behind me. Don't let him into the country. And I listened to her and didn't let this dude into the country. And then the next day in the paper, it says that there was a shooting at one of the local nightclubs and a bunch of women were killed. And it seems to imply that by not letting this dude through, he took retribution on those women by getting his people who were inside the country to kill them. And so that's a moment where you think that the game is giving you a moral choice. Oh, I'm going to make the right decision. I'm going to help these people. And it doesn't end up mattering. It ends up being worse for those people than if you had done nothing. Than if you had just done your job and shut up.
And this is, if we want to bring in, a little Adorno here as well, this is sort of, again, it fits into the Hannah Arendt point too. Like, this is a system wherein the actions of the individual are necessarily devalued. You can say minuscule, right? Whatever you want to say in response to this giant system, right? It sort of just perpetuates itself almost on its own, or at the very least with very little input from, the boots on the ground individual, non-powerful person, let's say.
Yeah. So did any moments when you were playing the game really jump out to you, like any interactions or any characters?
Yeah, there was one that stuck out to me a lot because he came to the checkpoint. He was like this weird old man. He came to the checkpoint and he had no paperwork, and it was like, yeah, I get into the country, right? I thought this was great.
Yeah, you're talking about Georgie Costava.
Georgie?
His name. Georgie, Georgi.
Yeah, so yeah, that was totally his name. So like I turned him away and I was like, what are you doing, man? Get papers. And he said, oh no, it's okay. I'll be back. And so he comes back with like a hand drawn with like a crayon like passport. And he was like, yeah, I have papers, right? We're totally we're good, man. And I was like, no, Georgie, we're not good.
And Georgie he's so upbeat. Like every time he's like, oh, of course.
Yeah.
Georgie forgot.
Best country.
Best country. Of course you can't get in. Best country in the world.
And Georgie, so he eventually gets the correct papers. And by the time he got the correct papers, I was just so like, you fucking idiot. Like, Georgie, I know that something's wrong with these papers. You must have stolen. Like, this must be wrong. And so I rejected him. Yeah. Yeah. You gave me a crayon the first time and you said, his papers? So when I rejected him offhand and I got cited because he had the correct papers, and he leaves and he's cursing you. Astaska sucks. This country is worst country. You are a bad man. I thought you were a good man. You are a bad man. And I was like, oh, well, I guess that's the last I'll see of Georgie. And it was either a day or two later, he came back and he had the correct paperwork again, except this time he was 3 pounds heavier than he was supposed to be. And so I had to scan him. And I scanned him, and Georgie, very sad, lumpy man, but he was carrying drugs, and I'm like, Georgie, what's this strapped to your back, Georgie? And he's like, is drugs. I'm like, Georgie, you can't bring drugs to the country. He's like, I'll give you $10 if you let me bring the drugs into the country. And I was like, how did you know my price, Georgie? Into Astaska, his best country. And so it turns out if you just turn him away enough, he makes good. Georgie makes good. His drugs.
Georgie's got it together.
So Billy, I guess last time you brought this up in the podcast organically, I want to ask, how was your experience with stamping
Yeah.
and efficiency?
Well, you asked this question originally was how did we measure ourselves getting good at the game?
Oh yeah.
And I guess we shouldn't be doing this talking about the earlier versions of trying to record the
Yeah.
podcast before it
That's
fucking
fine.
failed.
That's fine.
But
A little inside
but
baseball. Our listeners will appreciate it.
yeah. So I measured how good I was at the game after a while, the actual mechanics of like checking people's passports and their papers by how little I had to think about it during the process. And we learned that of the three of us, I like thought of these characters as humans the least. Because I was trying to just bang them out. Like, if you're good, you're good. If not, you're not. I was trying to go for the perfect run. You know, everyone who's supposed to come in gets in. Everyone who's supposed to get turned away gets turned away. I actually didn't care about what people were saying. So a lot of the times I didn't read the text boxes. The only reason why I noticed Georgie's character specifically is because the papers that came in front of me looked like so weird that I began to notice Georgie's character. So I very rarely listened to what they said. It was papers, please. Are you good? If so, you're in. If not, you're out. So I basically never looked at anybody. I just took their papers, and I guess the only time that I looked at them is if I needed to scan them for something.
So I guess this raises an interesting question. If you are trying to maximize for money, right? If you're measuring yourself at how effectively you can do this brutal job inside of this authoritarian system, what rewards does this game provide you? Because you could imagine a game where doing well, right, gets you some additional rewards, you get a lot of money, and then you can use that money to buy things that make the job easier or give you some prestige. But Billy, did you find yourself with a surplus of money? And if so, what did you spend it on?
So I did find myself with a surplus of money. I was net gaining like maybe between 40 and $50 a day.
Gaining?
Towards
Oh wow.
Yeah, I was going up in money because I was pretty fast at checking the stamps. Now I'll say this: I actually got to one of the endings of the game by accepting a bribe, and the only reason why I noticed that is because something different came across my desk. I didn't care what the person was saying to me. I cared about it because I took the passport, took the papers, and then here's some other papers. Oh, it's money. And again, that's how I noticed that character. Originally, they came to me with like $1,000, and they were like, "Hey, like, let me in or whatever." Or no, I think they just like gave it. Like I forgot how the interaction was, but I said no originally because I was playing it by the book. And then they came back later with like 2,000 now. And I was like, okay, cool. So I was way up in money. And I was like, all right, I'll take one doc on my paperwork on my record for this huge incremental advantage. Like, I could even have, like, so many bad days of work and still be ahead at this point. I had many jumps ahead of the chain of incremental advantage by having this cushion. And through some series of events, I didn't, like, resolve that storyline correctly, and I got, like, arrested and thrown in jail. That was one of the possible endings of the game. So I ended the game there, but on my second playthrough, I didn't get all the way to another ending again, but I was better at checking passports. So from day one, I had like a maybe I shouldn't say 40 to 50. I probably had like 30 to $40 surplus every single day, and I spent it on better apartments.
Okay, so you can get better apartments, and then the game will also eventually give you upgrades, the ability to buy upgrades to your shitty desk, but the desk upgrades don't really do much. They make you slightly more efficient, but not much more efficient.
Yeah. You can also get like posters, like certificates of adequacy.
Yeah.
That you can hang on the wall.
Billy, what did your certificate say? What did your plaque say?
I don't even remember. Like, I don't think I looked at it.
Okay.
Like, it was neat, but it wasn't helping me win. Like, it wasn't helping me win the game anymore.
Well, for me, the minister or something of travel came and visited my checkpoint, and he presented me with a plaque of adequacy.
Yeah, he was not happy with me either.
He was not. Then I got a reward that recognized my presence. So it was not. It turns out if you make too many mistakes, they don't celebrate you as much as they should.
There was one thing that I didn't get personally in the game, but I saw it when I looked up some other possible endings. There was like a child's drawing you could get.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
your kid.
I got a child's drawing.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's about midway through the game.
You're also not allowed to hang it up.
Yeah.
yeah, you get fined.
You can get soccer
Um,
posters too.
The
It turns out.
the inspector comes specifically on days 10, 20, and 30, I think. So if you know the game well enough, you can have them up and then you just take them down that day, and you can put them back up later, I think.
Yeah, and the way you get a child's drawing is at a certain point. So the game continues like ratcheting up the tensions with your neighbor countries and giving you escalating rules. Like after there's a terrorist attack, all of a sudden everyone needs extra papers to prove that they're legit. Then there's diplomatic turns where your country feels the need to punish other countries. All of a sudden you get diplomats and they have different papers than regular people. Then there's work permits because all the workers coming from other countries are stealing the jobs of Aristotskins, so you need to keep them out except for the people who are certified, and so you get these like escalating levels of bureaucracy. And at a certain point after a terrorist attack, you're given a gun and tasked with shooting anyone who makes a break for the border.
Yeah.
And at first it's a tranquilizer gun, and you can use that to knock people out. And if you actually successfully shoot someone with a tranq gun, then your son will draw you a picture of Daddy the hero with the gun.
Is it your kid?
Yeah, your kid
Yeah,
draws
yeah.
you a drawing of you as a hero. And you only get 3 shots,
Yep.
which kind of sucks. You can also get thrown in jail if you shoot one of the guards or if you shoot anyone waiting in line.
Right.
Turns out. Don't turn the gun on other people, I guess is the lesson.
Yeah, just don't do that in general. Don't turn guns on people.
Yeah, but I will say, like, the first time someone breaks for the border, like, they give you a key that you use to unlock the gun drawer. And when you're one of the cool things about this game is that there's actually papers on a desk, and you need to actually move them around physically by, like, sliding them around on the table. And it means that the key, if you want easy access to it, you need to put it in a place that it doesn't get covered up by papers. Otherwise, you won't be able to get the key into the drawer fast enough to make the shots.
Eventually, though, can't you get like a sniper rifle or something?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't get it, but I know that it exists in theory.
Yep. You got to shoot people.
Mm-hmm.
Your job. They needed to save on security.
Yeah. So
So-
this actually, like,
Go
I
ahead.
wanted to mention this other thing. One of the reasons why I'm so, I guess, good at this part of the game. Well, I guess there's 2 reasons. One, I didn't care about the world politics so much because it just bounced off me like a fucking tennis ball on a brick wall. And, anytime there was like a commentary on politics or society or like the state of the nations with tension, like I just didn't get any of that. So all I had to quote unquote enjoy was seeing numbers go up, which we all know I absolutely love.
You can find numbers going up regardless of the situation. So in one where the numbers actually go up, wow.
Yeah,
The
right.
gameplay.
Uh-huh. So this
They actually
gets,
do the math at the end too.
yeah. So
It's like my family's going to be full bellies.
I've worked in fields of like customer service, customer relations before, and it was actually at a museum. I won't go into the details of where exactly it was, just so you don't like know too much about the business that I used to work for. But I
It was
worked in a
MoMA.
museum.
He did the
What?
paintings.
Yeah. And when people would come in, they'd have like a membership card. I actually, myself personally, got so good at checking people into the museum. I was like head and shoulders above everybody else that worked there. Like, I could get people in the door so much faster than everybody else, and it was because...
Did you get a plaque of adequacy?
No, but I got a promotion.
Okay. That's better than a plaque of adequacy.
I got Peter principled the fuck out of that employment situation. But I would take a person's card, and the reason the way I do is I'd actually, when I'd greet the person, I would vomit out my very standard, like, vanilla, but very pleasant and professional greeting, but I wouldn't actually make eye contact with the person that I was talking to. My eyes would go to their card, and I'd be quote-unquote checking their papers. But in this, museum context, give me your certificate or your card for what's going to let you in. And I had a way, like through muscle memory, to scan their card and without looking at the keyboard, like hand it back to them while with my one hand, and my other hand was like tabbing through all the necessary buttons and numbers for like how many like adults and kids and like elderly and like babies, and like I would just go through the numbers. So when I looked at them, it wasn't to have a human-to-human interaction. It was to quantify who was in their party and does their membership cover who they're bringing in. And I got so good at doing that because I maximized the efficiency of that workspace. I did the exact same in Papers, Please. I mean, it got down to like, how am I organizing my papers so that I know that when I have someone's like work voucher, I only need to see this part of the sheet, so I can put that down first, cover it up with something else, like their passport. Like, I got so like mechanical about how I kept my desk to optimize approve or deny efficiency. I mean, I took that straight from my real life work experience. That was one of the most, I guess, impactful parts of the game for me, is that it emulated this one thing that I'd done before in my life almost perfectly.
So I feel like you've stumbled into the critique of the game or the critique that the game is making about authoritarian societies.
And then just ran with it.
And then just went with it.
Except, yeah, because I just didn't get that that was a bad thing. I guess
you were like, I am the apex.
I'm so efficient.
But the fact that it was like a political commentary, I don't get it. It just goes over my head because I'm politically in.
Like, really? Like, really? You didn't like stop to think like, oh man, I'm really good at implementing the bureaucracy that this, let's just say, dictatorship implanted, like, to separate these people out? Like, it didn't occur to you that could possibly have political significance?
I mean, it did, but the thing is, I don't have context to be able to digest it the same way. Like, I get that
how much context did you?
I get like, that Papers, Please is supposed to be a commentary on this type of society. I get it, but like Pete, I like specifically asked you over the week, like, Pete, I don't actually know what fascism means. Can you like tell me what that, like, the definition of that word actually means? Like, right. That's just a tip of the iceberg example of how much shit I don't know about, like, world history, politics, like how, like, I'm like willfully ignorant of a lot of this stuff.
But I feel like, say for example, when the game has a guard come up to you and say, "Hey, we get paid a bonus if you detain people. Please detain them."
Well,
and then they take people out at gunpoint.
If you like incorrectly detain people, you get docked, right?
Yeah, but you get a bonus, but you get a bribe for detaining people.
Whoa. You mean, so I'm not sure if I actually got to that part of the game, because I remember I had like an early ending and then I played it again. But like, if you have a reason to detain somebody, yeah, and you detain them, you still get the bonus.
Right, but the very point is the speciousness of your reason.
Yeah, so once you...
The reason's dumb.
At first,
following the rules? Policy, guidelines, procedures?
So at first, when you are detaining people, it is because you have found a gun or a bomb on them. It is a
great reason to detain somebody.
Yes, but later on, after you're told that you can detain people and you will receive bribe money, if a paper is out of place or there's a discrepancy in their story, instead of just punching,
like the guards or like
the guard,
like a person,
the guards get more. The guards get more money if they detain people. They get bonuses for detaining people. So
you get a cut of that bonus.
Yes. So when you detain people, when people slip up or if they have a thing wrong with their papers, you can either stamp them rejected or detain them. And if you detain them, they get taken away at gunpoint, and who knows what happens to them. If you reject them, they just walk away. So the game very clearly presents you with these two options, one of which is clearly more brutal but expedient for you, and there is no downside to detaining people from your perspective. You do not get docked. It does not show up in, as a demerit. No one cares that they were detained instead of rejected. But it's very clear that being detained is far worse for these people than being rejected.
Not great.
Not at all. So I feel like did the scanner, like the TSA scanner that let you see people's nudity, did that do anything?
I mean, that was weird, and pixelated boobies. Yeah, sure. That was pretty stupid.
And dongs.
Yeah. And dongs, yeah. They were definitely dongs.
Yep. Mm-hmm. That was weird and dumb, but that still doesn't necessarily cross a line for me, because if there's a little bit of tacit consent given by whoever's walking up to a border to know that they're probably going to get checked out. Every time I go to an airport as opposed to running the train, which I've just done recently. I had 2 trips recently where one I flew, the other one I took a train. When I walked up to my train to get on, I was there 5 minutes before it left, and no one even checked my bag or my ID. There was nothing. I just got on the train. When I went to the airport to go to PAX, I was sitting in my airport longer than my flight itself was, because I knew that I was going to have to go through massive security, including getting my body scanned.
Right, but Billy, if I said to you, right, for the rest of your life, I'm only going to let you eat hot dogs, right? That's the only thing you can eat, and then you then
I would opt out. A man chooses.
I'm saying, if you then consented to eat those hot dogs because I gave you no other options, that's a kind of worthless version of consent, right? In the same way that if somebody's leaving, if they're a refugee and they need to get scanned, if they consent to that scan, that's a fairly worthless version of consent.
Where in the game does it tell us that these people are refugees?
I mean,
most of these people aren't. They say, hey, I'm here to work. I'm visiting family. My job is in Arstotzka, but I live across the border. That's most of the people that you see.
Yeah, but they're just vacationing in scenic Arstotzka.
When you turn them away, they say, no, please don't.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I wasn't looking at what they were saying.
Yeah, but if you don't read the book,
I was trying to get the paper.
I'm saying it.
That would be like going into a class about Shakespeare or about Romeo and Juliet and saying, well, wait, they die?
Yeah, it's I think the book's pretty happy. Well, they died there, and I didn't read the ending. It's a happy book.
I didn't read it.
Oh no, that's a shitty ass analogy.
Why?
Because if I'm trying to make numbers,
in front of you and you didn't read it.
If I'm trying to make my numbers go up,
he doesn't have time for all this.
in a literature class, making my number, aka my grade, go up requires me doing the reading.
Okay.
Nothing about listening to what these people had to say made my numbers go up.
But
now there were cases. The only time I listened to what a person had to say was when it was Georgie, or when a person didn't have the right papers, and then I'd push the button to say, hey, where's your other missing paperwork? And then say, oh yeah, sorry, it's right here, my bad. Or, oh, I don't have it. And then I said, yeah, fuck off.
Okay. So the arbitrariness of the stamping and the reasons for people being kicked out you didn't care what the rules were or how they changed.
No, I cared what the rules were. That's all I cared about.
But the fact that they were increasingly absurd and Byzantine.
Were they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Well, you didn't get to the most Byzantine.
What we're getting at is the context that I was missing. if you had told me that, oh, there's going to be 10 rules at the end of the game, and to you and people are like, wow, this is really like excessive, like that's the part that either I didn't experience it in the game, or the comment or like the history that it's trying to point to, I'm not familiar with or aware of.
I think the point, and Pete, maybe you could speak to this, is that it's not history.
Yeah. And that's part of why I picked the game, really.
What do you mean, like it's today?
Yeah, I mean we're in a like we're making debates about immigration all the time in our present life.
We literally
we're building a fucking wall.
The country we live in literally does not allow people from certain countries into this country anymore. There's no amount of visas. Like, there's certain countries that we used to accept refugees from that we no longer do, regardless of cause or paperwork or anything. Like, this is an ongoing debate that is happening right in front of us right this moment. And I guess you didn't get to the part where, like, the more ludicrous and Byzantine stuff happened. Like, did you ever get the reason stamp?
On Wednesday,
like I got to the point where people were saying, "Hey, I'm visiting," or like, "I'm visiting. What are you visiting for? Like, what's your reason for visiting?"
Okay. Yeah, so
and they'd say like or like I got to the point where they'd say like, "Oh, you have a visitor's pass. What's the duration?"
Okay.
I would ask them, "How long are you staying?" They'd say like 2 weeks or 2 days or 6 months, and I just like verify that it was
what
accurate.
they said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so at one point you turn away like a diplomat or a journalist or something, and people start complaining to the government that they don't know why they got kicked out, and so the government gives you a new stamp, and that stamp is tied to the reason. Like, if you talk to people and find that their papers are wrong in some way, you have to stamp their passport with a reason stamp for why they were turned away, and then stamp it with a rejected stamp, because they need both stamps. But the part that makes it extra absurd is that there's only one spot to stamp on the passport, which means when you stamp the reason stamp or the rejected stamp, one of them is illegible. Probably both of them are illegible. So you are stamping this stamp that is impossible to read. Like, either you're stamping instead of like the normal location where the stamp's supposed to go, you're like stamping over their like information and paperwork, or both stamps have no meaning because it's completely illegible. So it just becomes absurd. Like, you're doing these stamps and then you're throwing this passport back at a person saying, okay, go leave. And technically you're giving them the reason, but it's completely absurd.
Yeah, or like the moments where the game basically forces you to let in the general's mistress, right? You either let her in, or if you don't, if you detain her, I think you just get sent to jail or shot or something. But like, either way, you need to let this woman in because the general comes up and is like, hey, let in my mistress.
Yeah. Yeah, and like the arbitrariness of, oh, you can't decorate your wall except with these plaques, and if these plaques don't decorate your wall, then you go to jail. Or we fine you. Actually, if you have stuff on your walls twice, you do go to jail.
Yeah. If you don't put up the posters, he just says like, yo, where are these posters at? You don't go to jail for not putting up your certificate of adequacy, but he does notice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a lot going on that I think makes the commentary so explicit, and maybe it's just because you got an ending that was earlier in the game, and so like the ridiculous levels of granularity and stupidity of how things change just never hit you because you just didn't see it.
So like, I've seen them all, not in game. Like, I went and I went and looked up what the other ones were.
Yeah,
I mean, I think we're getting too far into this part of the conversation, but like, I think the point is made that yeah, they get ridiculous. Yeah, you and Pete have a response like, oh, this is a really strong commentary on like some current events right now. I'm saying I didn't notice it the same way, partly because I'm pretty sure my professional history in sales, business, customer service has conditioned me to think that that's just sort of normal, like how it is. You got policy, you follow it for a reason. and coupling that with my lack of current event understanding.
Yeah, and I think that this game is very explicitly set up to make you ask the question, like, is there a good reason? And I think it emphatically says no. Usually the bureaucracy is there for either nefarious reasons or for no reason. It's arbitrary.
I mean, except for the part where, like, people try to bomb your fellow citizens or kill them, and then they make it harder to get into the country. We're kind of down with that part, right?
I mean, they make it harder to get into the country, but they also make it clear that no matter how much you ratchet up the discrimination or the closing of the borders, it's never 100% successful. Like,
so who
there is
does
still
that make
violence.
Evil? Does it make the rule makers evil, or the people that are causing the rules to be implemented evil?
Well, like,
Why not? Why not both?
Yeah, or now you're getting into like an argument about whether or not terrorism is ever justified, which is a lengthy discussion. I don't think we're going to solve in a video game.
Yeah,
podcast.
and like maybe I don't even have enough information to start that conversation.
Yeah,
so
that's a whole.
Maybe.
Let's just leave it for now.
A good, interesting question, just not one for us right now.
Yeah, and if you want to start having those discussions, I remember there was an article by Jason Concepcion on The Ringer last year when he played Papers, Please right around the time the Muslim ban was getting
Did he really?
bandied about. Yeah, it's a good article.
Okay. I thought you were going to be like he wrote all about like the moral imperatives of terrorism. I was like, really? On The Ringer? Curious.
No. Though they did have an article on Syria that was surprisingly hard hitting.
Okay.
But I think that that's a good supplemental thing to read about this.
Yeah,
is there anything else to talk about with this game that people want to cover?
I'd like to add one more piece if we can. Sure. So I'll give them another piece of sort of supplemental reading. So I think you can see an operation here, sort of very obviously, if you're familiar with the theory, is the idea of necropolitics. So necropolitics is sort of an offshoot of, I shouldn't say an offshoot, it's a criticism of Foucault's biopolitics, right? So the sort of famous formula of biopolitics is that the government's job eventually became to let die and make live, right? So it's sort of through, things like vaccines or public health initiatives, research, they would sort of pick selected populations and sort of make them live and proliferate.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to try my best with his first name. I know how his last name is pronounced. Achille Mbembe. He's an author on post-colonialism. He came up with this theory, and it's found in an article of the same name called Necropolitics. And it was sort of an inversion of that to say, no, really how this operates is you let some people live by forcing others to die, right? He says, let live and make die. So it's really more of a right to kill than a right to sort of, foster life. And I think you can see this in operation here, right? As we have sort of designated populations within Papers, Please, who are forced to die such that other, privileged, preferred populations can live via entering the country, right? Like when you think about, okay, what are the approved jobs, right? All these engineers sort of getting through, what have you, right? And I think you can start to see how this sort of idea of, shifting the law sort of applies to some people and not to others, such that you can allow these people to die to basically subsidize the lifestyle of a whole bunch of others is really an operation here. So that's Necropolitics by Mbembe, Mbembe. That's how you spell his last name.
Very cool. And Billy, did you have something?
Yeah, so I don't know if you guys did this, but there's a Papers, Please short film.
Ooh.
I just did a little bit of research on the game once I got to one of the endings, and I realized that I probably wasn't going to finish another ending. So I just did a little bit of research, and there's a Papers, Please short film. It is about 12 minutes long. It's on YouTube. It was professionally done. It wasn't like just a shitty fan-made film, but people actually got the approval and consent of Lucas Pope, who's the designer of the game, and the publishers. Publisher of the game was 3909 I think that's the name of the publisher. They like got approval from it and said, hey, we have this like manuscript, like this like screenplay. We want to send it to you for approval and see if it's okay if we make a film. They're like, yeah, sure, go for it. Well, it had a decently, I shouldn't say like super famous actor, but like a relatively well-known Russian actor
working actor.
Right, playing the inspector. And I'm not going to go into every single detail of the short film, but I would recommend you both watch it. It's only about 12 minutes long.
Sure.
And it really accurately captured through music and cinematography the rote, mechanical, like rhythmic checking of papers over and over again. And it had a good like scene about there was one character interaction where there was a guard who wanted to have his girlfriend or wife or lover or somebody let through the checkpoint.
Yeah, he's a soldier they met during the war.
Right. And that actually happened in the game, right?
Yes, it did.
Cool. I mean, I was listening to people's sob stories, so...
There's a cool little, like sprite interaction where after you let the woman through, they hug. It's nice. It's heartwarming. It's one of the few moments in the game where your actions actually have a clear moral outcome.
Right, so I turned her away. She didn't have papers, and I wasn't listening to what she was saying.
I need that $5.
Well, in the film, the character, the inspector, clearly feels bad about it. Like, he feels awful. And she leaves and leaves like a little heart-shaped locket on the desk. And he clearly feels shitty about it. And you don't see the soldier again until the very end of the movie, but towards the end of the short film, an old man comes in and is like, hey, thanks for letting me in. Like, here's all my papers were all good, but also, just make sure my wife gets through okay, because, you know, she gets really nervous, and if she's nervous, she's gonna blame me for it, and it's gonna be a whole mess. And it was like really cute, like old people banter, like cute old couple banter. And the woman comes through a couple people later, and everything looks good except there's one letter like off on her name, like transposed or mismatched, but everything else is legit. It's just like off by one character in her name. And the inspector lets her through, only to have a few minutes later a shock when there's an explosion and that woman had a bomb strapped to her chest, and then he like stumbles out of the inspection booth and sees a bunch of dead soldiers, and the cute old man that he just let through is pointing a gun at that young soldier who you turned away his girlfriend, and the shot cuts away and he puts a bullet in the guy's head. You don't see it though, but you hear the gun go off. And then the old man raises the gun towards the inspector, cuts to black, and there's another gunshot, like he gets killed too. So maybe some of my feelings towards the game about, policy and procedure should be upheld, is because maybe that moment affected me in a short film's like point of view. Does that make sense?
Sure.
It does, but it's a dangerous. I don't like arguing from those cases.
Yeah.
I get what you're doing. It makes sense to me. But when they're used as sort of like a justification for these larger procedures, I always find it a little troubling.
Right. I'd be, in this case, making an inappropriate generalization. Like, this kind of stuff would happen all the time if I didn't follow the rules. Like, there's definitely fallacy at play, but no doubt did it shift how I viewed the game a little bit.
Sure, and understandably so.
Yeah, and I think even in the movie, the man gets through because his papers are correct regardless.
Yeah, he does get through. His papers are good.
So, well, I think that's all we've got for Papers, Please. And that means that it is now Billy's turn to pick what game we play next.
Yeah, so it seems like it's been ages since I've been able to play like a game for recreation and enjoyment, because I've been basically only Dark Souls for the last 3 months in preparation for the Giant Bomb Community Endurance Run, which no thanks to our generous benefactors made that run nearly impossible for me, and I spent 15 grueling hours banging my head against Dark Souls bosses.
But we all learned something about My Immortal.
We all learned something about My Immortal.
And we all learned something about Sunny D.
True.
That it has canola oil in it.
Ugh.
Are you joking?
100% true. Sunny D has canola oil as its one of its ingredients.
Another reason it's disgusting.
That's why it's viscous.
No, that's why it goes down so smooth.
Does the smooth and creamy or whatever the other flavor is?
I don't know. I haven't looked at its contents of ingredients, but I'm sure it's exceptionally smooth and sweet. No, but the next game that we're going to play is one it's been on my backlog. I just want to really enjoy a game. So we're going to play Trine. Trine is known for having just really nice gameplay, tight gameplay, great narrative, great storyteller. Okay. I'm excited about it because it's been on my list, and now I get to finally play a game that's like just strictly fun. I was really hoping for a cool Pete pick because generally I really enjoy Pete's games, but can't win them all. Papers, Please was pretty miserable.
Hell with you.
Hey, it's okay. Hey,
to hell with you.
You have not made us play Silent Hill for the Room.
That's true.
You have not made us play Sonic Chronicles: Call in the Dark Brotherhood.
I am a human. Like,
yeah.
I'm not some sort of miscreant.
You have not made us play Barkley Shut Up and Jam Guy Den or Saints Row the Third.
What
so, remember when
Trine?
Trine, Trine.
Gotcha.
Remember when we played Kirby 64 and when we played Pokemon Snap?
Yeah. That was good. That shit was good. Wuppo was good. That was weird, but it was still fun.
Wuppo was
all that shit was great. Yeah.
Remember
but like I'm saying,
Game of the Year Detention?
Well, I didn't get to play that one yet.
You should play that one, and then you'll be like, wow, remember when Gino made me play
Abyssal City?
Ugh.
I do remember Game of the Year Abyssal City. Those were the good days.
Yeah. Now here we are, Papers, Please, and...
Can I ask, have I ever picked a game that was just straight up not fun?
What was that one with the Afro, samurai?
Oh, yeah.
What? Oh, Fury?
Fury.
Fury was fucking great.
Fury's you think so? I think Papers, Please is great.
All right, that's fair. To each their own. I mean, ultimately, I think we would agree that maybe not. Were it not for the podcast, would you guys have picked up Papers, Please anyway?
Probably at some point, but not anytime soon. Because I know what that game is. I've read a lot about Papers, Please, and so I kind of had the gist of it. And I would not have necessarily felt the need to have played it because it is a difficult game. It's not fun. But I think it's best experienced via play rather than reading hot takes.
I agree with Gino, but I probably would have just spent that time rereading Necropolitics instead. Which would have been a lot quicker.
All right. So next time we'll be playing Trine. So thank you, Billy.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. Excited to play a fun game for the next podcast, and excited to be back on sort of a normal schedule. I don't think we have any major gaming or podcast events coming up now, so we can kind of kick back and chill with some fun, good podcast content.
Yep. Thank you, Pete.
Always a pleasure. I think we'd all agree that Papers, Please is probably not a very fun game, but I will say it's probably, in fact, I'm confident saying it's a more important game than Trine, having never even heard of Trine prior to this moment.
We'll find out. And thank you, listeners. Remember, you can get in touch with the show at deeplistenspod, deeplistens.libsyn.com, and deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. Till next time, peace.